The name of this music is "I Don't Want to Go On." That's hardly the case with me. When you're doing a job like this, it's like you can keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and you never get tired of it. It's 58. We're at 6 minutes after 8 o'clock on News Radio 1310, KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. I saw an interesting comment yesterday on Facebook, and there was a story about, and it's an ongoing debate and has been an argument for a very long time. We have a lot of dams that have been built on the river systems here in the Northwest, and because of that, we have some of the cheapest power of anywhere really in North America. I brag to friends all the time about what my monthly electric bill is, and they're just astounded by that, where they're paying in many cases considerably more. But you've got people on the other side who say those dams should come down because it's harmful to fisheries. That is, that fish can no longer migrate in the numbers that they used to. And when I posted this, I got a comment from Mike McFadden, a friend of ours from Camas County. And Mike mentioned, he said that he had done some work with the EPA long ago, and that at the time in the EPA, and by the way, you're listening to Bill Cowley as well on Magic Valley this morning, that the EPA at the time had thought that perhaps this might actually, and they had developed systems to enhance migrations of fish. And Mike, first of all, welcome back to our program.
Good morning, Bill. It's always a pleasure.
Of course, we should point out that because of certain security issues, there might be some things you can't talk about this morning. Having done some government work, you know that you certainly can't talk about some things, but you do have a little liberty. Uh, this argument has been going on for as long as I remember, long before I moved to this part of the Northwest, and yet there you see this in somewhat of a different light.
Well, my exposure with the EPA started back in 1983, and I worked on the third worst spill in the United States out of 473 sites. It was number 3 on the Superfund list. And the only reason they told us at the time, the only reason it was number 3 was that we couldn't tell anyone about it. So they had to kind of hush this project up. And I went on to do projects. I actually ran wetlands remediation projects in 2004, 2005, which was the second largest projects in the United States. And at that time, they told me I was the leading wetland specialist in the United States, which is kind of an honorary title. Didn't mean a whole lot. But
I suspect, by the way, you listen to a lot of swamp rock because of that. But
well, I'll tell you, I learned a lot about the EPA and those agencies, and the one I spoke about in 1983, I signed a non-disclosure that's probably still applicable, so I can say a little bit about it. But we were told at the time that the impact of the project leaking out, excuse the pun, would have an effect on the national economy, because what we were working on was going into the Sacramento River, which irrigated the food that fed the world. And at that time, I think we were like an eighth of the economy in the United States, California agriculture area. So they said, you can't tell anyone about this, and signed a ton of paperwork. But the effect of that project was tremendous on the fish population in the Sacramento River. And we couldn't tell anyone about that either. And the project I'm referring to is Iron Mountain, which was 4,400 acre site. Originally, back in the 1920s, they mined iron, silver, gold, copper, zinc, and pyrite, I think, as well. So it became a problem in 1924 and started polluting the river, so they shut it down. And it was really cool going into the site because it was like a movie, if you can, a Twilight Zone movie. Everything was still laying there. You could go into the operating booth for the tramways, and there was a book laid open. We walked up and looked at the book, and it was a 1924 Montgomery Ward's catalog. And it was just bizarre. The whole site was bizarre, but it was so toxic that there was no living organisms in a 7 square mile area. Not a fly, not a squirrel, nothing. And at that time, I think it still is, the most acidic site on the planet, with a pH level of 0.04. So For those listeners that don't know, what clear water is 7.0. Car battery acid is around 4.0. So this was 0.04. And it initially dissolved every single test piece of equipment that we put in it. And they had to develop new equipment to just test the pH of the water. So this is what was going into the water, and it was killing fish, and it was killing things downstream. And we just couldn't tell anyone about it. And pretty much public knowledge now. But because of that, I learned that there was a lot of cover-up involved in major projects and major things that were happening around the country. And then going on, like I said, in 2004 and 2005, working on wetlands projects, I saw exactly the same thing. So nowadays they say, well, we want to take out the dams because it's harmful to the fish. And I start looking, well, in California, for instance, they took out the Red Bluff Diversion Dam in 1992. Now, that was a gravity feed system that irrigated, what was it? It was 150,000 acres of farmland with gravity feed. And somebody in their infinite wisdom thought it'd be neat to take that out because it was damaging to the fish. And they put in huge electric pumps to pump the water. Instead of gravity feed now, they're using electric pumps. And that was initially only a $100 million project. 2 years later, they did an upgrade on it for $120 million. So $220 million to change a project that had been running since 1964 with just gravity. And we had a fish ladder there that generated millions of fish fry, millions of them that would go back into the system. And that just got taken out. So now it's a natural fish go up the river. And it's just hard for me to believe that the electric pumps, the load on the grid, the carbon footprint has got to be enormous from that.
And it really doesn't make any difference one way or the other with the fish because either way, they were still getting back upriver, right?
Sure. And California has, I think, 12 fisheries right now. And you take the Coleman Fish Hatchery. I did a facility just below the Coleman Fish Hatchery. And every year you could literally walk across the salmon that came up to that hatchery. It was phenomenal. It was like walking across dry ground. There was millions of them coming back. They generate 13 million fish a year at that one hatchery. And California has 12 of these hatcheries. And you go, well, you just start doing the numbers, millions and millions and millions of Chinook salmon being generated and put back into the rivers. And then what do we have here in Idaho? We have 13 hatcheries, and I know not all of them generate salmon, but there's 13 in Idaho generating millions and millions of fish. And you go, well, looking at the numbers, and they'll want to tell you that, well, we have to take the dams out because it's hurting the fish population. We're far more efficient in hatcheries than it is in nature generating these fish. And we're seeing the fishing offshore, for instance, some of the projects I did on the West Coast. We see huge, they look like carriers out there, these fish hatcheries or fisheries that are processing fish, 5-mile-long nets catching fish, and they're not domestic fishers.
Right.
They're not. So does that come into the equation that now we're allowing those close to our shores, closer than before, and that's got to have an impact. We're generating this fish to feed other countries. We're doing far and above what I believe would be our responsibility, generating these millions and millions of fish. And they're talking about taking out one of the most efficient renewable resources we have, which is it rains in the mountains, it snows in the mountains, it flows downhill. We turn it into power. It snows in the mountain the next year. It rains in the mountains, it flows downhill. It fills the lakes, it fills the reservoirs. We use it not just for irrigation, but we're using it for power. And they're wanting us to replace it with things that are not quite that dependable, like wind. Solar's great until you have cloudy days. The wind-generating turbines, I feel that they're just the ugliest thing that you could have on. I'm sorry.
Well, you don't have that many of them in the valley where you're at right now. But I'll tell you what, I get out, I get going down the highway toward Pocatello, and they're all over the place. And I'm driving to Boise, and they're all over the place. And you got a beautiful area like Hagerman scarred by them. Yeah, I think that we've got better options than all of that.
Yeah, and I did a presentation last year for the governor on behalf of Eric Pike, which is a company that's wanting to install a renewable resource power generating plant in just west of us here in Camas. And great system, wonderful system. I was on board, and like I said, I did a presentation for the governor on this project. And they had said that they wanted to augment it with wind turbines. And I said, I won't be a part of it. I won't have any part of it if you're going to have wind turbines on our hills and we can see on our horizons. And I said, I have friends that work in that agency, and they have told me they made 52% on their investment, the companies that are installing them. And I don't know anywhere you can make that kind of year after year profit. And they said, well, the funny thing is they'll never generate enough power to pay for themselves. And they're heavily subsidized, so we're paying for the feel-good. We're generating free power, basically, is what they sell it to people. You know, it's natural free power, but if you take the energy it takes to build those things, and then the maintenance contracts are phenomenal, just phenomenal that go with those. And if people knew the real numbers, they wouldn't allow another one to go up anywhere. So that project, even though I helped them, and it was, like I said, making the presentation to the governor about that project, and it used water that was pumped up from Anderson Reservoir into a new reservoir. This is the proposed project, and it was literally a solar battery. So the water was pumped up during the day when the sun was shining using solar panels, flowed down through the turbines at night generating power. So I was on board. I thought that's a great way to store energy, and it's solar-based. But like I said, once I heard that the windmills were part of it, I wanted no part of the project.
Well, hold on to that thought for a moment. We'll take a short break, and then we'll pick this conversation up in just a moment. Mike McFadden joining us from Fairfield this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And speaking of some of his experiences working on some of these projects, and of course, warning us that this talk about increasing fish populations by ripping out dams is not necessarily the guarantee the environmentalists make it out to be. We want to talk a little bit more about how you can know more about these things too, coming up in just a couple of minutes. We're at 60. It's 8:20 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you till 10 a.m. We're going to spend a few more minutes with Mike McFadden this morning. He's joining us from Fairfield, from the ranch in Fairfield. Mike, as many of you know, he's got a background. He's been on the program with us before. He's got a background not only in engineering, but also owns a few patents, if not more. Does some work you might call invention, which there are still Americans who do that, still come up with unique ideas and benefit the public from that. Bill Colley, too, on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 22 minutes after 8 o'clock. Mike, one of the things you brought up was, some of the things that the public just, they may get some passing knowledge of it occasionally, but a lot of these arguments are being made, and we hear, and I understand there's even sportsmen out there who think, we got to do something to increase these numbers of fish and the like, but they're not always getting the entire picture. How would someone go about perhaps getting a few more details so they better understand all of this?
Well, that's where the problem lies, is what news source do we trust nowadays? And I've heard on your show multiple times people talking about that. Who do we trust? Major media? Give you a little idea. When I worked with the EPA, I worked on the project, the Wetlands Remediation Projects, 2004 through 2005, for instance. And we did a project in Napa, California, 10 square miles of wetlands remediation. At the time was the second largest in the United States, second only to the Everglades. And this was a pet project of Dianne Feinstein. And California purchased the property in 2003, and the agencies that had say over it, California Resources Agency, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, on and on and on. And I was in charge of the entire project, and it went on for 2 years, second largest in the United States. And I did thousands of water tests. Every day I did hundreds of water tests for clarity, turbidity, salinity, so on and so forth, and turned that in every single day. And my records, when I'd seen what they printed out, it was different from the test I had taken on a daily basis. And when I asked about it, they said it didn't fit their narrative for continuing the financing for the project. So they actually made it look dirtier than it was in some cases. And we did things like we moved 250 yards of contaminated material from these sites 8 times a day by barge and dumped them in the Bay Area, right out in the estuary out there. And that's 250 yards 8 times a day. And it was all done clandestinely because it was Dianne Feinstein's project.
Of course.
So it's years and years of seeing this made me distrust what we're actually being told. I kept records, I kept my books because I was doing the testing. And I thought, well, if something ever happens, I can always show my records against what they printed out. And fortunately, that never came up. But when the project started, we actually opened the gates, the day we opened the gates, they came to me, the officials came to me and said, you can't be within 1 mile of this opening ceremony. And I'm in charge of this whole project. And I asked them, but why is that? And they said, well, we know your background. We know you don't like Dianne Feinstein. And we figured you could shoot probably accurately for 1 mile. So literally I had to stay a mile away, but I had 2 helicopters at my disposal. And I figured, if I was that kind of person, it wasn't going to be a problem.
By the way, well, sir, go ahead.
Any rate, like I said, years and years of that. And we did similar projects, also Feinstein projects. We did 7 square miles out of Alviso, California. That was originally a garbage dump. And they dumped hundreds of millions of dollars into it to turn it into a wetlands for birds and whatever. And the water was putrid, just putrid. And even the animals knew they wouldn't come in there. But we dumped, hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars into a boondoggle.
I got a note from a writer that says, from Mary, she says, the environmentalists need to go pound sand. She said, I say, keep the dams. Windmills and solar panels are expensive and ugly.
Yeah, well, I like that. And one thing they don't tell you about the solar panels also is they don't go on forever. They wear out. The amount of photons that they collect. Here in Idaho, not many people know what's available is 700 and I think it's around 740 watts per cubic meter, per square meter rather. And we have about a 14% efficiency conversion rate right now. So it equates to about 135 watts per square meter that's available. And if you add that up, it's the whole roof of your house isn't enough to power your house. And that's on a clear, sunny day. And then they wear out, and their lifespan is, the effectiveness, I've been told, is around 11 years. They start a steep decline. So we're financing these things for 20 years. When you finance the solar cells on your home, you're financing them for many, many years, and most people don't realize they do wear out. And as they stop producing the electricity at the rate they were promised, you're not getting the return you were promised. So I think doing the research, look into it, look at the efficiency of all these so-called environmental friendly devices, you start to see that the dams and reservoirs that generate water is truly the most renewable resource we have. And the fisheries, using that as an excuse, like I said, there's 13 fisheries in Idaho, and each one of them producing millions of fish a year. You look at Clearwater, they figured 30,000 adult fish will return this year to the river. Rapid River Hatchery produces 3 million spring Chinook salmon, just one hatchery. McCall Hatchery, 1 million Chinook salmon. Sawtooth, 2.4 million, and they release 19,000 adult fish a year. That's just a handful I've mentioned out of 13.
I'll let you go, Mike, but I want to thank you for your time this morning.
My pleasure, Bill. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you too. We'll stay in touch.
We'll do that. Take
All right.
care.
You too. Mike McFadden joining us this morning. And of course, I mentioned he's got a background in engineering and in invention. That is, he's got a long list of patents behind him as well. It's 60. We're coming up on 8:30. Hey, also joining us from Hearing Doctors of Idaho, Shane Hunsaker. Dr. Hunsaker joining us just after the news this morning at 9 o'clock on KLIX.